What's up and welcome to the 8 dirty tricks in the Jobava London system, which arises from white playing the first queen pawn move and after that continuing with knight to c3 and on the next move playing bishop f4 regardless of your opponent plays here, which makes it very universal opening for white. And the very first trap is the very classical one, which you've probably seen before, but I gotta show it anyways, is when black plays the symmetric move knight to c6, which strangely enough turns out to be a big blunder, as after knight to b5, white threatens to capture this pawn with a knight, forking the king and rook, and black has no sufficient defense. Now, there are a couple of funny things about this particular position and the whole variation overall. Now, the fun thing about this position is that it occurred in 3.4 million games. Just think about this, how many players fell victim to this trap. Now, the second thing, which is kind of funny, is that a lot of players believe that this whole Jobava London system is something very novel and creative, while in reality white is playing very trivial opening moves, just developing their knight and bishop, and it is actually a mirrored Italian game. We're just playing same moves on the queen side, versus in the Italian we do that on the king side. So that is kind of the fried liver attack. Anyway, what can black do now? You're threatening to capture this pawn, forking the king and rook, and what can they do? Some of them will try to move the rook out of danger by going rook to b8, which is another funny blunder, as this time you capture this pawn not with a knight but with a bishop, and you still deliver a similar double attack to their pieces, winning material. Let's take it back. In most cases, they're going to play e5, try to close the diagonal for your bishop, but then they lose this pawn, and after this take, you also attack their knight, therefore they'll usually move it, in most cases either to the center of the board or to h5, trying to counter your bishop, and we'll talk about these both options. Knight e4 is another way which allows you a very spectacular follow-up, a queen sack, queen takes d5. It's quite uncommon that you can sack your queen right on the 6th move of the game. And after queen captures, you then continue with knight takes c7, this triple fork, and after the king moves, you then get your queen back, and along the way you actually won 3 extra pawns. Plus his king is centralized, you're going to play f3, kick this knight away, perhaps castle queenside, and attack along the d-file, and overall you have overwhelmingly superior position. The second common sub-variation of the same trap is after black plays e5, and by the way, taking a side note, it's quite an anti-accomplishment for black, as normally it's not easy for black to ruin their position in 4 moves, which is what they did here. And after e5 pawn takes, we talked about knight e4, how about knight h5? It's also very common, they're trying to attack our bishop, and after it goes away, they hope to get this pawn on e5 back. Now you're at the crossroad, you've got 2 options and both of them are really good. Now, if you want to just have a simple game, then you play pawn e3, cementing your bishop, and this whole construction also that opens up this attack, kind of forcing black to trade off on f4, and after that you end up just with an extra pawn with a good and solid position, and that is nice. There's also the other alternative, which is more aggressive and much trickier, and I actually quite like it because usually it simply wins the game. It's the move bishop g5, where you attack the queen, offering them to take this bait, as black can also move in the opposite direction, right, and grab your queen, and in most cases they does, which turns out to be another mistake, but it's super tricky and therefore definitely not easy for black to figure it out. Now the follow-up is knight takes c7. We deflected the queen from this defense, therefore we're now free to capture this pawn with this fork, but that's not the end of story, as after king to d8, there are a couple moves, of course, Stockfish suggested them, so let's give him credit, which actually allow you to truly dominate and actually to win the game without giving them any counter chances. So the first thing is, instead of taking this rook straight away, you first play this in-between move knight to f3, which allows you to hit the queen and also to save this pawn on e5, so that black can't even get this pawn back. Now, they'll usually play queen e7, and now there's another interesting thing. You could have taken this rook on a8, but it turns out to be even stronger to first capture this pawn on d5. That hits the queen once again, plus this opens up the d-file for your own queen, therefore it sets it up for various kinds of discovered attacks on the next move. Your knight can jump somewhere, let's say to b6, opening up this discovered check, and then you're gonna grab the rook anyways. Therefore, at this point, they'll play queen to d7, covering the file. But then you deflect the queen once again in this game by playing pawn g4. Last time we played bishop g5 and deflected the queen that way. This time we play pawn g4. And The thing is, we want the queen to move off the d file so that we can actually discover, provide that discover check. But black has to do something, because if they don't do anything special, then you are just going to grab this knight. The knight has nowhere to go. We control this square by pawn, we control this square by our knight. Therefore, if he does nothing, we just grab the knight and we'll end up with extra pawns and completely winning position. But if he captures the pawn, that is another blunder, because now we don't even have to go after the rook. We can go knight f6 and make it even stronger, because now the king is in check and we're gonna pick up the queen. And what a devastating attack. Like, you can really have a number of brilliant moves within a single game and finish it off in style. Moving on to the third trap, it works when black plays pawn to c5, and it is actually a trap from the black perspective. I won't flip the board just to keep it consistent, but this trap is for the black side. And the c5 is a choice of a lot of grandmasters and top level players. Overall, by the way, about the Jobava London system, like originally, it is named after Jobava, Jordan Grandmaster, who found a way to spice up the London system by putting the knight to c3 instead of putting the pawn to c3, and as we have already seen, sometimes it gives you those extra attacking opportunities. Now, of course, kids quickly rebranded that into Jobava London System, so you may use whatever title you love more. And after it got a little trendy, even top players started playing this, including Carlsen, Gukash, Nakamura, Firouzja, and whatnot. So you really need to be aware of this opening, because for sure you're gonna face it many times playing black. And you may consider playing it as white because it's pretty simple and there are indeed a bunch of tricks here. Now, after pawn to c5, it looks like black is offering a free pawn. And if your opponent captures it, that is actually a mistake, but again, it's not easy to see why. But the reason is, it gives way to this d pawn of black to move forward, and now this knight from c3 has no convenient squares to retreat. Like normally, I would wish to move it to the middle of the board, but it's controlled by black. Similarly, we can't move it here because it's controlled by both the queen and knight. Therefore, the only normal move for white, which does not lose the game on the spot, is retreating back to the starting square on b1, which is of course passive and undesirable in general. And the moves knight a4 or knight b5 are both losing to queen a5. For example, if knight b5 is a standard thing for white to win games, but in this case, it's a way to lose a game. Because now, knight to c7 is of course a threat, but because there is no pawn on c7, it allows black to jump out with their queen to a5. This pawn on c7 no longer obstructs this move, and now with queen a5, that's a double attack to the king, and this knight on b5, therefore black is gonna pick up the knight and get a winning position. By the way, there is always somebody who writes in comments, Igor, having an extra knight is not a winning position, I lost so many games having an extra piece. Now, that's not a subject for today's video, but in this case, I'd recommend that you check out my free masterclass by clicking the link below this video, and there I share with you like several very easy guidelines that you can follow to play consistently and to actually win winning positions. Now we're coming back to the white perspective, and how are you going to counter the move c5 if your opponent plays that? Well, what I would recommend, one of the good ways, of course you can just play pawn e3 and that is perfectly fine, or you can be more aggressive and even counter-strike in the center with pawn e4. You want to contest the center and you want to keep being active. This way, if he captures here, you capture there. That's all right. If black captures on d4, you recapture with the queen and you keep mounting pressure, you keep attacking, that is also fine. But in most cases, they're going to see the free pawn on a4, they're going to capture it, and now you're capturing this pawn on c5. Now, you may wonder, what's the difference? Why did you sacrifice the pawn on e4 first? Well, there is a reason here. First off, we opened up to our bishop, therefore it's easier for us to develop there. Secondly, now with the pawn on e4, we're not afraid of this pawn to be pushed to d4 any longer because there is no pawn there. Therefore, black has no follow-up to their attack. Now, after this exchange in the middle of the board, the material balance is equal. We traded a pawn for a pawn. Now they see this tension and they take on d1 because they're not subscribers of this channel and they don't know that to take is a mistake, and that's why they're going to lose to you. They're going to take on d1, allowing you to bring your rook into play and control an open file, and you already have a really great position. Moreover, they'll usually follow up with one more mistake. They'll play a natural move knight c6, trying to develop, playing e5, attacking this bishop, capturing this pawn on c5, but it only works in their fantasies because you still play the same trick, knight to b5, and they still have no defense to this knight to c7 fork, to the king and rook. Moreover, knight c7 in the current position would even checkmate them. So they really have to be careful. The best thing they can do is probably to play e5 anyways, but now after knight to c7, you are still forking the king and rook. After king e7, you could take the rook straight away, but since you're going to lose this bishop anyway, it's better to at least get a pawn for it and then grab this rook on a8. and you end up with this simple endgame where you're up material, they have awkward king, and hopefully you can convert it to a win. The trap number 5 works out against players who love playing this kingside fianchetto, whether they're Grunfeld players or King's Indian defense players, whatever it is. Quite a lot of your opponents will play this move pawn to g6. And now after pawn e3 and bishop g7, of course you could just develop normally, but instead you can also become more aggressive and play h4 straight away. Now initially this does not even look like a threat because they actually do control this square already, therefore it feels like you can't even push the pawn forward. By the way, if they wish to stop that and go h5, then guess what? A normal chess game continues, you just play chess. But many of them will allow you to push h5, and if so, they're in trouble, because you will play h5, despite being a sacrifice. And now the idea is after this knight capture, you can sack the rook right here on h5, and although you're down material just a little bit, you actually have a lot of threats and a really devastating attack. Like, your queen on h5 is really active. In many variations, you'd wish to play bishop d3 and then just checkmate them there. Similarly, you could play knight f3 to g5 and also try to checkmate them there. Besides that, right now, the queen on h5 also joins the attack with this knight, and you threaten to play knight takes d5, also a new and sudden threat. Therefore, although theoretically the position is balanced, it's just very difficult for black to defend it. In some lines, you may even castle queenside, finish your development, let's say, for example, right now they need to guard this pawn, right? So they play something like pawn e6. And then I recommend knight f3. Very standard and flexible move, keeping all your threats at hand. And after this, you can choose whether you wish to play knight g5, bishop d3, or maybe just castle and put your rook to the h-file and attack that way. Again, you have a ton of threats here. The most played move by black here is queen f6. A natural reaction trying to bring at least some pieces closer to the king and to guard it, but that move actually is a blunder, because after bishop d3, you threaten to play queen takes h7, and after h6, there is another beautiful move which they did not expect, and it's the move bishop g5. And the queen, strangely enough, is trapped. It has nowhere to go. We control all these squares, but if the bishop sacrifice is accepted, we still play this queen to h7 checkmate. Moving on to the trap number 6, let's say your opponent plays pawn e6, a very good and standard move. You play pawn e3 and they now play pawn to c5. Again, the move generally makes a lot of sense. They want to contest the center, and for many years this whole Jobava London system was not considered a mainstream opening, just because traditionally it is not advised to put your knight to c3 and to block your c pawn, as it can't go forward and can't participate into this fight for the center. Therefore, playing c5 for black makes a lot of sense. Now, you can still play knight b5, threatening this fork knight to c7. It's not as dangerous as it was when black had their knight on c6, because now black can cover the square by going knight a6. And some of your opponents will certainly do that, but it's still alright, as at least you forced your opponent to put their knight to the edge of the board, which is bad. Some of your opponents will play queen a5 check. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe they thought that it's a double attack, which is not the case, as your knight is actually guarded, but for whatever reason, quite many players play queen a5 here. And usually, people play this move pawn to c3, which is an okay move, but it's a defensive move, and it misses an opportunity to win the game on the spot with a more aggressive move. The thing is, we wish to play this knight to c7 fork. We just need one move to do that, and you can win this tempo by going pawn b4. Really strong move. Now, our idea is, if he captures with a pawn, we'll have time to play this knight to c7 fork. They'll usually capture with a queen, delivering this check, but then you play c3, and here's the difference. This time we're threatening the queen. Black has to move the queen, and now we have time to play knight to c7. You see that this trick works in a lot of different sub-variations of this Jobava London. And we attack the king, attack the rook. After they move somewhere, you could have taken this rook straight away, but that would allow black to play queen takes c3 check and have some counterattack. But the nice thing about this position is that the rook has no room to run away. Therefore, you have time to simply play rook c1, guard this pawn, therefore black can't capture it, and on the next move you will calmly capture this rook on a8, winning material, plus the king on d7 is awkward and exposed, and then you'll enjoy not only extra material, but good chances to attack this king within the next moves. This goes to show that after knight b5, they should not play queen a5 check, they should instead just play this defensive move knight to a6, which is still okay for you. Then you play pawn to c3, which solidifies the center and also covers up for all kinds of checks. Also, we take away all the squares where this knight from a6 could possibly go to, making it a very miserable piece actually, and this little pony really has no future. Black will usually play bishop d7 because they feel annoyed by your knight. Then you can play a4 to overprotect it. It was actually protected by the bishop, but this time you add a pawn so that you'll have this like really solid position with the knight. And if they take it on b5, that is a natural idea that is actually wrong, because now with the bishop coming up here to b5, we're checking the king and black is still in trouble. They need to cover, then you play knight to f3, threatening knight e5, taking advantage of this pin. And that is yet another trap. Quite many of your opponents will simply overlook the fact that you can jump there and attack them. For instance, they'll play knight c7, if I'm not mistaken, it's even the most played move, and there you can they try to trade off this one, but you can eliminate it first and then play knight e5, and they're defenseless. You attack this knight twice, and since it's pinned down to the king, there is no way out for them. Interestingly enough, even if they notice the pin and they see this threat coming and they try to play f6 to stop this move, you can play it anyway. And after knight to e5, they capture it, but then you play queen h5 check. After they cover, you then play queen takes e5, hitting the rook, as well as this pawn on e6, and they're done. For example, if they want to save the rook and go rook g8, by the way, the knight is still pinned, therefore it can't capture a queen. Then you play queen takes e6 with one more double attack. They'll need to cover. Then you could take the rook, but you can also take the knight first. The queen is pinned, therefore it can't even move. They have to move the king out of check, but then you grab the rook and they're completely destroyed. Well, for example, they take here, you play here, queen takes d5 check, and then maybe on the next move you will castle, and you completely ruin their position and capture like literally the majority of the forces they had. The next trap works out even against strong opponents, and there were, in fact, lots of games played by GMs where they missed this. For example, right here, we're observing the game played between Jobava, the author of the system, playing against Sugirov, another strong GM. Black played a6 here. They're aware of the threat, knight coming right there, therefore they play a6, you then play e3, they play pawn c5, they want to just develop, but now since this pawn is undefended, you simply grab it. And of course black hope to get this pawn back, but we'll see that there is a trick after that. They go knight c6, you also develop, they play bishop g4, beating your knight, you play bishop e2, so far so good, everything standard, they play pawn a6, now they expect to get this pawn back, but you guard it with your knight from a4, making it a little bit harder for black to do that. And some of your opponents, especially those who are a little bit more advanced, will notice that in fact they can't take this pawn anyways, because after your knight captures it, they've got this queen a5 move with this double attack to the king and the knight. Therefore, they hope that you'll cover, they'll play queen takes c5, and they'll end up with a good position. And in fact, even GMs, even Jobava in this game himself, the author of the system, missed this opportunity. He played c3. I think so, yeah, he played c3. But the move that allows white to get a winning position is the move knight to d2. And the idea is that we not only cover our king from this check, but we also open up this attack against the bishop. And this is what black did not expect. Now they have no time to take this knight, because then we'll grab this bishop on g4. And at the end of the day, we'll be up a piece. Therefore, they have to go down the rabbit hole of this line, bishop takes e2, but now you still play knight takes b7. Another interesting counter-strike, threatening the queen and possibly knight d6 check to the king. Therefore, they'll probably have to keep capturing everything, bishop takes d1, knight takes a5. And now we're also threatening this knight. By the way, some of your opponents just move this bishop away or take on c2, which is a blunder. Then you grab the knight on c6, you'll be up a piece. They have to take here. And at the end of this hungry games, we'll see that you're just up a pawn in an endgame. Of course, like, yeah, you still have to demonstrate some technique to win this, but nevertheless, you could outsmart black and grab a pawn throughout all these trades. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to know how to actually win such positions, feel free to check out the free masterclass by clicking the link up there. And if you want to know my 3 main tips to avoid blunders, or at least to reduce the quantity of blunders in your games, check out this video right there.